The Baltimore Ravens. Who was originally the Cleveland Browns until 1996, the Ravens have put up a pretty good resume since they've been around. They are a two-time Super Bowl championship franchise with a general defensive mindset throughout the years. Times have changed, however, and we are embarking on a new era of Ravens football. For fantasy, this is the first lineup where I see a lot of good and bad at the same time. A bunch of high suggestions and injury concerns plague this team. Let us see what we are dealing with today. How is everyone doing today? My name is Aaron and this is the Gameday Hour. Welcome to episode 3 of the Fantasy Football Team Review. In this series, we take a look at each and every 32 NFL franchises and see what they have offered for fantasy football. Here, we analyze the team's quarterback, running back, wide receiver 1 and 2, tight end, and starting kicker. Our goal is to analyze last season and see if these players are worth drafting, and if so, when and where. Today, we analyze the Baltimore Ravens.
Lamar Jackson, Baltimore Ravens quarterback.
Today we start off with the 2019 Most Valuable Player of the Year, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, to me, is one of the most complete quarterbacks in the entire NFL, and I'm talking specifically for fantasy because he puts up stats and numbers unlike anybody else. Though I say that, last year was a down season because even though he is a complete quarterback and now the most paid quarterback in the NFL, he didn't play a lot. He had only 12 games played. He had 203 completions, which was 27th. He has 326 total attempts, which is 25th. And I've talked about this with Kenny Pickett. You want to have a better completion spot than you do an attempt spot, but he doesn't have that, which gives him 62.3%, which is 26th in the entire NFL. He had only 2,242 passing yards, which was 26th. He had 17 touchdowns, which was tied for 16th, so that was pretty good, but he had 7 interceptions, which was tied for 87th. However, the kicker is he's a two-way. Not only is he a great passer, he's an incredibly great rusher. He had 112 carries, which was 44th, 764 rushing yards, which is 33rd, and he had 3 touchdowns, which was tied for 44th, so he had a total of 20 touchdowns last year, which gave him a total of 258 total fantasy points, and again, we're going with PPR, which was 16th among all quarterbacks. So, despite having a down year, he still put up great numbers, and that leads us into the projections. Would I draft? Definitely. He is a quarterback 1, round 1 through 4. I highly recommend him because he puts up numbers unlike anybody else, but even though I highly recommend him, he does have an injury warning. Now, most dual threat quarterbacks who are good both in the pass and the run, I would give this warning to. But since he actually has an injury history, this is why I give the injury warning. But he's not the only Baltimore Raven on this list that has injury warning. So when you watch this video, you're going to see that the Ravens are a cautious choice, and he's just the start of it. So at the end, I see Lamar Jackson, if he plays more games, he'll have better stats, and he also has a better wide receiver core. They picked up a wide receiver in free agency who we will talk about, and drafted one who we're not going to talk about, but I'll just go ahead and say that's Zay Flowers. So he has a great wide receiver core ahead of them this year.
J.K. Dobbins, Baltimore Ravens running back.
Next up, we have J.K. Dobbins, and do I feel bad for Dobbins? In 2020, Dobbins looked like one of the premier running backs going into the future, but just prior to the 2021 NFL season, in their last preseason game, he went out with a very terrible season-ending injury. And that injury was very frustrating for me because I did draft him in fantasy, and I had to go look for a new running back. It was unfortunate. And since then, he has not had a lot of play, and I can't see him as a high running back just yet. He did play last year, though, so let's take a look at his stats. He played 8 games, so he played just below half the season. He had 92 carries, 520 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a total of 77 fantasy points in PPR. Oh, I just noticed the typo there. It says football, it doesn't say points. We're just going to keep it there. Which was tied for 54th, by the way. It's unfortunate. Injuries seem to be a running theme for the Baltimore Ravens, and that plays a big role in the projections. So, is he a player I would draft? Yes, but not at a running back 1 and not at a running back 2. He, to me, is a running back 3 because of injuries. Because at some point, if he does get injured, you're going to need to find a replacement, which Baltimore does have pretty good replacements. They got Gus Edwards, who's always been a reliable replacement for fantasy. But it's the injury warnings, man. The injury warnings hurt J.K. Dobbins and his fantasy projection. For me, at least. Some people might put him at a running back 2, but I'm just going to keep him at a 3 until he can show consistency in play and not get injured very often. And because of him being an RB3 but still putting up good stats when he does play, to me he is a potential flex position. So I hope for the sake of Dobbins that he plays at least 12 games this year. I would love to see him play 12 games and put up really good stats. So we can only hope for the best. I hope he does not get injured. That will suck.
Rashad Bateman. Baltimore Ravens, wide receiver 1.
We start the wide receiver core off with Rashad Bateman. Now, same deal with J.K. Dobbins. Bateman was out for most of the season. He only played 7 games last year. And in those 7 games, he had these type of stats. I did it again, this time with carries. It's supposed to be receptions, but whatever. I was just going to go with it. He had 15 receptions for 285 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, and he had 51 total fantasy points PPR, which among all wide receivers is tied for 110th. And if you wonder, not every single category or stat has a tied for this place or a ranking among all receivers, but then again, he only played 7 games, so it's not fair to actually rank him. But with the stats that you see on screen, you have to ask yourself, do you want to draft him? And for me, I would draft him, but as a wide receiver 4 and somewhere in between round 10 or 16, because even though he is a wide receiver 1, a lot of times you're not going to see him be put into action because of Lamar Jackson either using the tight end or his own legs. And Rashad Bateman to me is not a wide receiver 1 on the depth charts, but he's on the depth charts as it is. I think that will eventually be taken place either by Odell Beckham Jr., who we'll be talking about in a second, or Zay Flowers, who they ended up drafting in the first round. And of course, the reason why he's so far low at wide receiver 4 is, for the 3rd time in a row, an injury warning. He doesn't have a good history when it comes to injuries, and it showed last year. So if you're going to get Rashad Bateman, I would recommend waiting out on him. There's probably better options anyways for the wide receiver 1 position. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the new Baltimore Raven.
Odell Beckham Jr. Baltimore Ravens, wide receiver 2.
Next up, we have the new Baltimore Raven, Odell Beckham Jr. And Odell Beckham Jr. is a Super Bowl champion, the Super Bowl 56, but he's been out of the league for a year due to an ACL injury he suffered in Super Bowl 56. So last year he did not have any statistics to base off of, and so we can't put these statistics on screen right now, but I can give a good estimation as a wide receiver too. The question is, can he stay healthy? Because he does have an injury history beyond that Super Bowl injury. He's had one with the Giants. He's had one that took him completely out of the 2020 season with the Browns. So the question is, can he stay healthy? And when he is healthy, he does put up good statistics. But the question is, he's never played with Lamar Jackson, unlike he's played with an Eli Manning who is pass friendly, or Baker Mayfield who's pass friendly, or Matthew Stafford who is pass friendly. But Lamar Jackson, not only is he a great passer, but he's a great rusher. But because of his rushing skills, you're not going to get a lot out of your wide receivers. How much are we to expect of Odell Beckham Jr.? So with all that in play, here's my projections. I project for Odell Beckham Jr. that he wouldn't be a player that I would end up drafting because of his injuries, because of where he is on the depth chart and who his quarterback is. However, I do think he will get some pretty okay statistics, at least for the first year. Maybe gets better throughout his years with Baltimore if he stays. And if you want to draft him, I believe he is a wide receiver 4 at the moment. It could go up, you never know, but I'd see him being drafted in round 12 and round 16. And as the trend continues, injury warning. Be wary of his on-field health, because that's always been a problem in the last few years. But if you draft him, it's good for you. I wouldn't, of course, but I would like to see him, get into play, get in action. Maybe I pick him up from free agency. Who knows? I'm intrigued to see what the Ravens do with Odell Beckham Jr. as their second receiver, and of course Zay Flowers as their third receiver. Maybe Lamar Jackson will put up even better passing stats because of this.
Mark Andrews, Baltimore Ravens tight end.
For the first time in this video, we're not covering a player with an injury warning, and we are covering a very, very good pick for fantasy football. We're going to be covering Mark Andrews right now, and Mark Andrews had a pretty good season, another good season as a tight end. He's not the best tight end in the league, but he is definitely a top 10, maybe even a top 5 talent. So let's take a look at the stats. He played 15 games, the most games out of every player we've talked about so far. And he had 73 receptions, which was tied for 30th among receivers and tight ends together. That also goes for every other stat below, except for total fantasy points. He had 847 receiving yards, which was 31st, 5 touchdowns, which was tied for 34th, and he had 184 total fantasy points for PPR. That is 4th among all tight ends. A lot of these stats come from the fact that he is Lamar Jackson's security blanket, but hey, for a tight end to be a security blanket, I have no problem with that. Obviously, we know other tight ends like that. Travis Kelce, George Kittle. I am really excited to see what the Ravens are going to do this year with this receiving core and with their security blanket, which leads me to the projections. Would I draft him? Yes, and he is a highly recommended player for me to draft. He is a tight end 1 on most fantasy football teams, and I would see him being drafted as early as round 4, at latest round 7. He's not a flex because I believe he's a full-time starter for tight ends. And I'm so glad to see that he is not an injury risk, unlike the other 4 we've talked about. So be at peace if you draft Mark Andrews, because he will be a reliable pick at the tight end position.
Justin Tucker, Baltimore Ravens kicker.
Last but not least for this episode, we have Justin Tucker. Justin Tucker is one of the most elite kickers in all of football, and his stats from last year showed. He was 37 for 43. First of all, if you're making or attempting 43 field goals, that means they really trust you. That was 86%, which was 20th in the entire NFL, so not a big stat. He's not 100% from extra points, but he does have times where he does miss extra points. He's 96.9%, which was tied for 17th. His long was 58, but don't let that confuse you. It might be tied for 9th, but in 2021, he had first place because he has the record now for the longest field goal in NFL history, 66 yards. Nobody's ever replicated that. Last year, he had 142 points, which was second among all kickers in the NFL, but here's the stat. 160 total fantasy points for PPR, first among all kickers. He's the first player to have a first in any of these stats. Which leads me to my projections. Would I draft him? Duh, I would draft him. He is a kicker 1. He is the number 1 ranked kicker in the NFL. There's no questions asked. Nobody even comes close. He is a kicker 1. I would draft him somewhere in round 6 and 9 because, let's be honest, there's other positions you're going to really need to fill before you get to the kicker. A lot of times kickers get drafted right after round 12. But he's a kicker that's worth drafting before that. And yes, of course he's highly recommended. If you have all your positions set and you need a good kicker and Tucker's on the board and no kicker has been taken, don't think about any other kicker. Get Justin Tucker. He is the guy that will help you in the kicking game. He can get you 10 points every night if he needs to, or every fantasy week if he needs to, and you can rely on him. He will make the big kicks when they matter. And that will do it for today's episode. This was actually a pretty fun episode to make, seeing all the injury risk, all the big names, all the highly recommendeds, and I'm very excited to pick some Baltimore Ravens this year. I want to pick some Ravens for my fantasy team, wouldn't you? If you like today's video, leave a like, comment down below, and subscribe. Hit the bell notification if you want to get notified for when new episodes come out. Expect an NBA Finals episode soon once the NBA Eastern Conference Finals is finished between Boston and Miami, whenever that is, whoever wins. It most likely looks like it's going to be Miami's. So be prepared for a Miami-Denver prediction podcast episode. Next episode, we'll end off the AFC North with the Cincinnati Bengals, and then we're going to move on to the NFC North and then trickle back and forth between the AFC and the NFC from there. So I hope you guys have a great day. Take care, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.